Well, I guess to start out, I would just like to hear a little bit about your background, about yourself, and what your inspiration was for becoming an artist.
Well, I grew up on the East Coast by the water in a home that was my great-grandfather's, and I really feel that growing up in this special place surrounded by water and also art inspired me as a young person to become an artist. I had two great-grandmothers that were both sculptors, and one of them took up sculpting in her 50s and was showing in New York about 1 or 2 years later, and she left a wonderful legacy of beautiful sculptures, and she founded a really good art school. So I think having grown up with that legacy and in a home that had beauty and art in it certainly had something to do with inspiring me.
And then where did you go to school? And how did you get, what medium did you choose to work in?
Well, in the beginning, I tried every medium. Not as much sculpture, interestingly enough, but certainly a lot of 2D mediums. I always loved art. I always loved making things. It was a way I expressed my love for people, and it just seemed like a natural thing to make things. And I went to Colorado College as an undergraduate. I started out in environmental studies, but when it was time to really think about what I would do after college, I realized I wanted to really love what I was doing, and I decided I wanted to teach art and make art. So sophomore year, I really started to focus on taking a lot of studio classes, and I explored drawing and painting and printmaking, botanical illustration, and graduated with a studio, BA degree, and then decided I wanted to go to graduate school, and I'd been a little torn between printmaking and painting in undergraduate school, but at that level, in those days, it was all about making an edition, which was a very consistent body of work of identical prints. And I was not exactly skilled at all the technique of making an exact edition. It was a little frustrating for me, even though I really love paper and multiples and prints as a medium. So I applied in printmaking and painting, and by the time I got accepted to a couple of schools, I decided I wanted to be a painter, that it felt really more organic and natural for me to be able to change my images as I was working on them quickly and in a forgiving way. So I ended up at CU Boulder, where I got an MFA in painting and drawing.
So that's when you started being an oil painter, and you worked on that for many years, right?
I did.
Okay. And so when you were creating your work, I know in your talk before you mentioned about how you have to be motivated by something. So when you were during your creative process, what motivates you to make a certain piece? Or
well, it depends at what point we're talking about, but I'm not someone usually who just starts making something without any thought. It's usually got to start with a photograph or a view or an idea, and then it starts coming together. And even when I paint from life, like if I was painting you right now, I don't really know what it's going to look like till it's done. I just know something inspires me, something speaks to me. And it might be color or light, how it hits the side of your face. It might be a sense of a spirit I get, like something emanating from a subject matter. And sometimes it's a story. And I grew up with a father who told stories and read stories to me. And I feel like when I have a story, I'm a little more engaged in what I'm doing when I'm making a painting. So if I don't immediately see the story, sometimes I invent the story as I'm sitting. I was painting interiors a lot, and I would sit a long time by myself in these spaces painting, and so I had a lot of time to think, and it sort of get, again, the spirit of a place. What is this? Because they were empty, usually, spaces. And so I would usually be thinking about, what is this space? What is the history of this space? Sometimes I would learn about the history as I was sitting there. Tours might be going through, or I would ask people. I ended up in places like the Karmazon Meditation Hall in Boulder, Mackey Auditorium in Boulder, the Boulder Theater, the Mayan Theater, and usually I didn't know a whole lot about those places until I started to sit there and listen and look.
So in your transition from oil painting to printmaking, I guess, can you tell us more about that process? Like, where did that come from? I know you said that when you started out with school, that you had always been interested in both oil and prints. But maybe, so turning in later in your career towards printmaking, what inspired that transition, and where has it taken you?
I think working really hard on a big body of work of oil paintings. For 2 years, I was making paintings of figures looking in water and figures underwater, and I was obsessed with that kind of imagery, photographing it, painting it. But it was really arduous to make like 34 paintings. And when I got done that show, I happened to meet a printmaker who taught me how to paint on a plate and run it through a press, and how that would be somewhere in between a print and a painting. And it had some freedom to it. It had some unpredictable nature, which I liked. Sometimes you get unpredictable good surprises, and sometimes you get unpredictable not so good surprises. But I liked the fluidity of that mono printing and monotypes. It seemed much quicker and more spontaneous than building up my paintings. My paintings were layers upon layers, 80 to 100 hours of layers of paint.
So it's a lot more of a quicker process, so I guess that's very different from your oils. So in being able to make more work at a faster pace, it just seems like such an opposite transition. So do you like one more than the other? You know, they're just such different processes, oil versus printmaking.
I think I like them both. And I feel like it's my painting's calling me back, and like the printmaking might affect the painting. The printmaking changes the whole process. It's sort of more in the moment of building it. I don't have a set idea. Whereas my paintings, a lot of times I'm looking at imagery. I'm basically a contemporary realist in my painting. So I feel like the printmaking is more inventive and shifts my brain a little bit, and it might eventually do that in my painting too.
So in the show that we're looking at today, you mentioned before that you kind of work with a story, right? So what was your inspiration for building this body of work?
Well, I had been painting water, and then I started making prints about water, figures in water that were more invented. But really what organized this show was a printmaking residency in Greece. A couple of years ago, I applied to go to a residency in Skopolis, Greece. And I invited a couple of artist friends to accompany me, and we had a wonderful couple of weeks where I got to go to the Acropolis Museum and the Antiquities Museum in Athens, as well as live on this beautiful island and just make art and be with other people who loved making art. And the water in Greece is an amazing color. And so I was walking around with a camera, but I was also making up scenes of underwater. All these are invented. None of these are, well, that one is one from a photograph that's literal, but that's probably the only one. All the rest of them are made up. And that's kind of different for me. So I guess I got obsessed about the Acropolis. There was something about visiting Greece this time that really spoke to me in terms of the story of humanity. And I decided I wanted to do a body of work of my own interpretation of the story of humanity. So this is kind of a first run at it, and we had to edit quite a bit of the work, and it's got some gaps, I think. So I feel like it's probably still going to grow, this show concept.
So it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. As far as the stenciling goes, can you explain to us a little bit more, I guess, how you came up with that idea, or where you got it from, and how it works, especially in this collection? You have a lot of stencil work.
The stenciling, I was introduced to stencil monotypes by Melanie Yazzie, who's the head of the CU Boulder printmaking department. And I'd never made art like that, and I found it very quick and spontaneous. And sometimes it would give me wonderful effects because the stencils will pick up ink from each other. And sometimes when you turn them over, they're even more interesting than what you ink on the front. And so I would really say it's from that experience that I got excited about working with stencils. And it allowed me to use some of my photographs and take parts of them and cut parts of them out and then put different parts together.
So it really is, I mean, a mixed media in a way, another way of doing the mixed media. And you add in, some of them you've added in your painting as well with watercolor?
Yes. Those are done more with, well, like that one over there is straight watercolor monotype, which means I've taken a big piece of acetate and I've painted a watercolor, adding gum arabic to certain colors, particularly the yellows. And then I let it dry, and I dampen paper, and I run it through the press, and the image transfers, and you get some different effects. These two right here are actually mono prints because they have what's called a solar plate as a beginning, which is more like an intaglio or an etching. So there's one consistent piece. I can keep printing that boy in the boat over and over again. So in those, we had that sort of benchmark monoprint of the boy in the boat. And when we inked it, we did a la poupée inking, which is where you move the color around the image. You can have some brown ink in the boat and some blue ink in the water. But it's a very slow and difficult process. I'm not very good at it. I had the help of a master printer. And when it was done, it didn't feel done to me. So in these cases, I went back and added watercolor after I printed and enhanced the color and moved the color around.
Do you think you're going to continue exploring combining those methods, I guess, and with painting and printmaking? And
I do, because I bought myself a press, and I have some big, beautiful solar plates that are sitting in my teacher's studio waiting for me, and I know I want to use those, and I have more ideas. I'm in the middle of some ideas that are still water imagery. One is a companion piece to that piece over there that's of young males kind of striding rocks in a creek. And then the other is this really giant kelp that I photographed while kayaking in the San Juan Islands last summer. And that really excited me. So I think for sure I'll continue printing. I'm also feeling the call to get back to painting. I like narrative in painting. I like portraiture in painting. So I don't see them as things that can't happen simultaneously, or as things that happen one after the other sequentially.
so your hopes, what are your hopes for the future? I mean, you want to keep building this collection up, and like you're saying, exploring with different processes, or returning maybe to some painting and doing different combinations?
Well, I think I want to do both of those things. I think I want to tell this story a little more coherently. Now that I've gotten to see it all up, I can see where some of the blanks are. I might need to find a bigger space to show it. And I definitely want to be painting. But I think my real goal is to work bigger and put them together on canvas. Possibly paper, but probably canvas, and see how the printmaking techniques can feed the painting. I'm still interested in that idea of telling stories. And I actually did some figure painting this summer, and it just reminded me that I love painting the figure. But it's something you got to practice. You know, it's not something you can just park and then come back to and feel really facile at it. So it's not always easy for me to say definitely where I'll go. I didn't know I would end up on this sort of big, I don't know if I'd call it a detour or a side path, but it just kind of took over. And I found a lot of mentors. I ended up with about 4 different teachers who were great printmakers that helped inspire me. So I see them both continuing, but also maybe marrying them.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. And your work is wonderful, and I look forward to seeing what you have in the future.
Thank you very much.